Velthorix had 4 arms, gray skin, and eyes that could see heat signatures in complete darkness. He was 700 years old, which made him middle-aged by Kathrani standards. He had spent the last 40 years of his life studying one species, humans. He remembered the day they first appeared before the Galactic Assembly. Their ship was small and slow. It looked like something a child might build from spare parts. The human delegation walked into the great chamber with wide eyes and nervous smiles. They wore simple uniforms. They carried no weapons. They bowed to every species they passed, even the ones who laughed at them. The Zorvathi ambassador had turned to Velthorix that day and said something he would never forget. "Look at them. Soft meat walking on 2 legs. They will be conquered within a century." Velthorix had nodded politely. But even then, something about humans made him curious. They were so small, so fragile. Their bodies broke easily. They lived for less than 100 years. They had no claws, no armor, no venom. By every measure that mattered in the galaxy, they should have been prey. But they were not prey. They had built ships that crossed the stars. They had developed technology that rivaled species 10 times their age. They had done all of this while constantly fighting among themselves. That was the first thing Velthorix learned about humans. They were always fighting. Their history was filled with wars. They killed each other over land, over ideas, over things that made no sense to outside observers. They had weapons that could destroy their own planet. They had come close to using them more than once, and yet they had not destroyed themselves. They had survived. They had reached the stars. They had looked up at the darkness and said, "We want to see what is out there." Velthorix began his research the day after that first assembly meeting. He requested access to human databases. He studied their literature, their music, their art. He watched their recorded history. He learned their languages. What he found confused him. Humans valued something called compassion. They believed in helping others, even strangers, even enemies. Their greatest heroes were not warriors or conquerors. They were healers, teachers, builders. They told stories about sacrifice and love. They cried at the suffering of others. This made no sense to Velthorix. In the galaxy he knew, the strong took from the weak. That was the natural order. Species rose by crushing those beneath them. Empires grew by conquest. Power was the only thing that mattered. Humans knew this. They had lived it. Their own history proved they understood the logic of violence. But they had chosen a different path. The other empires saw this as weakness. The Zorvathi called humans soft meat. The Drelkari dismissed them as emotional primitives. The Vakori refused to even acknowledge them as a proper species. Humans were a joke, a curiosity, something to be tolerated until a stronger species decided to take their worlds. Velthorix watched and waited. He watched when the colony ship Endeavour suffered engine failure near Kathrani space. The ship was carrying 3,000 Kathrani civilians, most of them children being transported to a new settlement. The engines had exploded. Life support was failing. The nearest Kathrani vessel was 6 hours away. A human ship called the Carolina was 2 hours away. It was a cargo vessel carrying medical supplies to a distant outpost. The captain was a man named Samuel Hayes. He had gray in his hair and lines on his face that suggested he had lived a hard life. Captain Hayes did not hesitate. He changed course immediately. He pushed his engines beyond their safe limits. He arrived at the Endeavour with less than 30 minutes of oxygen remaining on the damaged ship. The rescue took 19 hours. Human crew members worked without sleep. They cut through damaged hull sections with handheld tools. They carried Kathrani children through smoke-filled corridors. They gave their own oxygen masks to passengers who were struggling to breathe. 3 human crew members died during the rescue. A support beam collapsed on an engineer named Marcus Webb. A medic named Patricia Dunn suffered heart failure from oxygen deprivation after giving her mask to a Kathrani infant. A young pilot named Kevin Frost was killed when an airlock malfunctioned. They saved 2,847 Kathrani lives. Captain Hayes refused all payment. He refused all honors. When the Kathrani government tried to give him a medal, He said something that Velthorix recorded and analyzed for years. "We did not do this for medals. We did it because it was right. Those were children. Anyone would have done the same, but that was not true. The Zorvathi would not have done the same. The Drelkari would not have done the same. No other species in the known galaxy would have risked their own people to save strangers of another race. Only humans." Velthorix continued his observations. He watched when the plague of Voss spread through the outer rim. The disease killed quickly and painfully. It spread through air and water and touch. Most species quarantined the affected worlds and waited for the population to die. Humans sent doctors. Dr. Linda Reyes led the first medical team into the quarantine zone. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes. She had left behind a husband and 2 young children on Earth. She knew she might never see them again. "Someone has to help them," she said in a recorded message. "If we do not go, who will?" The human medical teams worked for 8 months. They developed treatments. They built hospitals. They held the hands of dying patients who had no family left. 37 human doctors and nurses died from the plague. New volunteers arrived to replace them. They saved 4 million lives. The Galactic Assembly did not understand. The Zorvathi ambassador asked Velthorix directly why humans would waste resources on species that could offer nothing in return. Velthorix had no answer. He only had observations. He compiled everything into a report. He titled it, "The Peculiar Compassion of Humanity." He submitted it to the Assembly archives. He recommended that all species study humans more carefully. The Assembly ignored him. They filed his report away with millions of others. Humans were not a threat, they said. Humans were helpers. They were diplomats and traders and doctors. They smiled too much. They valued individual lives over strategic advantage. They were weak. Velthorix did not argue. He simply continued watching. He noticed things that others missed. He saw how human soldiers trained. They pushed themselves beyond what their bodies should endure. They practiced combat until their movements became automatic. They studied war with the same intensity that their doctors studied medicine. He read human military history. He learned about their ancient warriors, Spartans who fought to the last man, samurai who valued honor above survival, soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save their companions. He found a human saying that made his blood run cold. "Beware the fury of a patient man." Humans chose peace. They offered friendship to every species they encountered. They shared their technology, their medicine, their knowledge. They asked for nothing except cooperation and respect. But Velthorix understood something the other empires did not. Humans chose peace because they knew what they were capable of. They knew the darkness inside themselves. They had seen it in their own history. They had walked to the edge of self-destruction and pulled back. They chose peace because they were terrified of what would happen if they chose war. Velthorix finished his second report with a single recommendation. Do not make humanity angry. The galaxy is not prepared for what they will become. No one read it. The Zorvathi Empire had ruled its sector of space for 3,000 years. They were a reptilian species, with thick scales, powerful muscles, and a brain that processed violence as pleasure. They had conquered 47 species. They had enslaved billions. They had burned worlds for refusing to submit. Their warmaster was a giant named Kroll the Unbroken. He stood 9 feet tall. His scales were the color of dried blood. He had personally killed over 10,000 enemies in hand-to-hand combat. No one had ever wounded him. No one had ever made him retreat. Kroll believed in one thing: strength. The strong survived. The weak died. This was the law of the universe. This was the only law that mattered. When Zorvathi scouts discovered the human colony of New Haven, Kroll saw opportunity. The colony was small. 40,000 humans living on a green world at the edge of human space. They had farms and schools and hospitals. They had no military ships. They had no defense platforms. They had trusted in the peace of the Galactic Assembly. The planet sat above massive deposits of rare minerals. These minerals were valuable. The humans were not. Kroll sent a fleet of 50 warships. He commanded them personally from his flagship. The devastation. He did not expect a fight. He expected submission or death. Either outcome was acceptable. The colony governor was a young woman named Grace Porter. She was 32 years old. She had been born on Earth but had spent most of her life building New Haven from nothing. She had planted the first crops with her own hands. She had helped construct the first school. She had delivered babies and buried the dead and celebrated every small victory along the way. When the Zorvathi fleet appeared in orbit, Grace did not panic. She sent a message to the Galactic Assembly requesting assistance. She sent a message to Earth, warning them of the attack. Then she opened a communication channel to the Zorvathi flagship. This is Governor Grace Porter of New Haven Colony. We have received no declaration of war. We have committed no hostile acts. Please state your intentions. Kroll appeared on her screen. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits. His mouth was full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. Your intentions do not matter, he said. Your words do not matter. You will surrender your colony to the Zorvathi Empire. You will accept slavery, or you will die. Grace kept her voice steady. We need time to evacuate our civilians. We have children here. Schools. Families. Give us 3 days to. You have 3 minutes. Grace tried again. Please, I am asking you for mercy. We are not soldiers. We are farmers and teachers, and Kroll ended the transmission. Exactly 3 minutes later, Zorvathi bombers descended on the northern settlement. The bombs fell on homes and farms and the colony school. 8,000 humans died in the first wave. The school had held 400 children. Grace Porter stood in her office and watched the smoke rise from the north. She watched her communication screens fill with desperate messages. She heard the screaming. She smelled the burning. Something changed in her eyes. She sent one final message before the Zorvathi ground troops arrived. It was addressed to the human ambassador at the Galactic Assembly. It was 3 words long. They killed our children. The message reached Earth 6 hours later. It spread across the human network in minutes. News broadcasts showed footage from New Haven. They showed the burning school. They showed the bodies of children in the rubble. The human response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Within 1 hour, every human military vessel in 3 sectors changed course toward Zorvathi space. Within 2 hours, civilian transport companies began volunteering their ships for military conversion. Within 4 hours, recruitment stations on Earth and every human colony were overwhelmed with volunteers. Merchant ships dumped their cargo into space to make room for weapons and soldiers. Research stations shut down as scientists abandoned their work to join the war effort. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to military production without being asked. The human ambassador to the Galactic Assembly requested an emergency session. His name was Daniel Cross. He was 53 years old. He had spent his entire career promoting peace between species. He had won awards for his diplomatic work. He was known for his calm voice and patient manner. He stood before the gathered delegates of 100 species. His hands were shaking, his face was pale, but his voice was steady. 8 hours ago, the Zorvathi Empire attacked the human colony of New Haven without provocation, without warning, without any attempt at negotiation. The chamber was silent. Velthorix watched from the Kithrani delegation. His 4 hands pressed together in the Kithrani gesture of deep attention. The Zorvathi murdered 8,000 human civilians. They bombed a school. They killed 400 children. Daniel paused. He looked around the chamber. He met the eyes of every ambassador. We offered the Zorvathi our friendship. We offered them trade. We offered them medical technology that could have saved millions of their people. We offered them everything we had to give. His voice grew harder. They responded by murdering our children. The Zorvathi ambassador shifted in his seat. He had expected outrage. He had expected demands for reparations. He had expected the usual diplomatic games. What he saw in Daniel Cross's eyes was something different. As of this moment, the United Earth government has declared total war on the Zorvathi Empire. We will not negotiate. We will not accept surrender. We will not stop until the Zorvathi Empire no longer exists as a political or military entity. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Several delegates exchanged confused glances. This was not how war was declared. There were procedures. There were formalities. There were opportunities for mediation. Daniel raised his hand for silence. I want every species in this chamber to understand something very clearly. This is not a dispute over territory. This is not a conflict over resources. This is not a political disagreement that can be resolved through compromise. He leaned forward. The Zorvathi murdered our children. We will destroy them for it. We will hunt them across every sector of space. We will tear down their empire brick by brick. We will not stop until they understand what they have done. He straightened. If any species in this chamber attempts to interfere, attempts to aid the Zorvathi, attempts to shelter their fleets or supply their armies, they will be considered enemies of humanity and treated accordingly. The chamber was completely silent. Stay out of our way. Daniel Cross walked out of the chamber. He did not look back. Velthorix watched him go. He felt something he had never felt before in 700 years of life. Fear, not fear of the Zorvathi. He had seen empires rise and fall. He understood conquest and submission. That was the natural order of things. He felt fear of humanity. He had studied them for 40 years. He had watched their kindness. He had documented their compassion. He had seen them risk everything to save strangers. Now he saw something else in their eyes. Something old. Something terrible. Something that had been sleeping for generations. The Zorvathi had made a mistake that could not be undone. They had assumed that human kindness was weakness. They had assumed that a species that chose peace could not wage war. They were wrong. Velthorix returned to his quarters and began a new report. He worked through the night. He analyzed human military history. He studied their weapons technology. He calculated their industrial capacity. His conclusion was simple. The Zorvathi had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They had poked a creature they did not understand. They had assumed they were the predator. They were the prey. They just did not know it yet. Velthorix had studied warfare for 500 years. He understood fleet tactics, orbital bombardment, ground invasion, and siege warfare. He had witnessed 43 interstellar conflicts. He knew how species fought. Humans did not fight like any species he had ever seen. The woman who took command of the human fleet was named Kate Holloway. She was 41 years old. 3 weeks before the war began, she had been captain of an exploration vessel mapping distant nebulae. She had never commanded more than 200 crew members. She had never fired a weapon in anger. Now she commanded the largest military mobilization in human history. Velthorix obtained recordings of her first briefing with human fleet commanders. She stood before officers who had decades more experience than she did. Her uniform was new. Her rank insignia was still shiny. She should have been nervous. She was not nervous. The Zorvathi expect us to fight the way they fight, she said. They expect us to mass our forces, meet their fleets, and engage in direct combat. They expect a war of attrition. They think they will win because they have more ships and more soldiers. She activated a holographic display showing Zorvathi space. We are not going to fight the way they expect. We are going to fight the way humans have always fought when we are outnumbered and outgunned. We are going to make them bleed. The Zorvathi had fortified their borders. They had positioned their fleets at strategic choke points. They had prepared defensive positions around their major worlds. They were ready for a conventional war. Kate Holloway did not give them a conventional war. Human ships appeared behind Zorvathi lines. They struck supply depots and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They destroyed communication relays, leaving entire sectors blind and deaf. They hit fuel stations, stranding Zorvathi warships without power. The attacks came at irregular intervals. Sometimes days passed with no contact. Sometimes 3 strikes happened within the same hour. There was no pattern the Zorvathi could detect. There was no way to predict where humans would appear next. A Zorvathi commander named Thorax sent a report to War Master Kroll after losing his 3rd supply convoy. They fight like they have nothing to lose. They attack without warning. They vanish without trace. I have never seen anything like this. Thorax was killed 2 days later when human ships ambushed his command vessel. Velthorix analyzed the human strategy. He recognized elements from human history: guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics, psychological operations. Humans had been fighting this way for thousands of years. They had refined it against themselves before turning it against the galaxy. But there was something else. Something that made human warfare different from anything he had studied. Humans could feel rage and think clearly at the same time. Most species experienced anger as a loss of control. Emotions clouded judgment. Rage led to mistakes. This was why experienced commanders cultivated detachment. This was why the greatest generals were often described as cold. Humans were not cold. They were burning with fury. Every soldier who deployed to fight the Zorvathi knew about the school. They had seen the footage. They had seen the bodies of the children. They hated the Zorvathi with an intensity that frightened Velthorix. But they did not let that hate make them stupid. Human commanders made calculated decisions about acceptable losses. Human soldiers executed complex tactical maneuvers while their hearts pounded with rage. Human pilots flew precision strikes while tears ran down their faces. They were emotional and rational at the same time. Velthorix had not believed this was possible until he saw it with his own eyes. The ground war was worse. Sergeant Tony Marchetti was 34 years old. He had been a construction worker before the war. He had helped build houses and schools and hospitals. His hands were more familiar with tools than weapons. Now those hands held a rifle. His squad was assigned to liberate Talos IV, a world the Zorvathi had occupied for 2 centuries. The Zorvathi garrison numbered 800 soldiers. They had fortified positions, heavy weapons, and complete air superiority. Tony's squad numbered 12. Standard military logic said they should wait for reinforcement. They should conduct reconnaissance. They should plan a careful campaign. Tony did not wait. His squad landed at night, kilometers from the nearest Zorvathi position. They moved through darkness like ghosts. They struck the garrison's communications array first, cutting them off from orbital support. Then they began hunting. The Zorvathi were not prepared for what came next. Humans did not need much sleep. They could function for days on short naps. Tony's squad slept in 20-minute shifts while the others kept watch. They ate ration bars while reloading their weapons. They never stopped moving. They turned every building into a trap. They turned every shadow into a threat. They appeared from nowhere, killed Zorvathi soldiers, and disappeared before anyone could respond. They left bodies in places where other Zorvathi would find them. The garrison commander sent hunting parties after them. The hunting parties did not return. After 4 days, the garrison stopped sending patrols outside their fortified compound. They waited behind their walls, watching the darkness, jumping at every sound. Tony's squad did not attack the compound directly. They did not need to. They cut the water supply. They destroyed the food storage. They shot anyone who tried to leave. They played human music on loudspeakers through the night. Songs about death and revenge and fire. The Zorvathi soldiers stopped sleeping. They started seeing humans everywhere. They turned on each other, suspecting traitors and infiltrators. On the 9th day, human reinforcements arrived. A full battalion landed outside the compound. They found Tony's squad still in position. 3 of his soldiers had died during the 9 days. The remaining 9 were exhausted, hungry, and wounded. The Zorvathi garrison had been reduced from 800 to 53. 53 soldiers who surrendered immediately. 53 soldiers who threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. 53 soldiers who had learned what humans were capable of. Tony Marchetti received a medal for his actions on Talos IV. He did not attend the ceremony. He was already on another planet, hunting more Zorvathi. When asked about his tactics in an interview, he said something that Velthorix recorded for his archives. They killed children, our children. I will not stop until every single one of them understands what that means. The interviewer asked if he felt any guilt about the Zorvathi he had killed. Tony looked at the camera with empty eyes. Ask me again when we find the soldiers who bombed that school. Velthorix watched human forces advance across Zorvathi space. He watched supply lines collapse. He watched garrison after garrison fall to human tactics. He watched the Zorvathi military lose more territory in 3 months than they had gained in 1,000 years. He updated his report with a new observation. Humans do not fight to win territory. They do not fight for resources or strategic advantage. They fight to punish. They fight until their enemies understand the cost of harming them. They fight until the enemy breaks. He added a final note. The Zorvathi are not breaking fast enough. 3 months into the war, the Zorvathi Empire was dying. Human fleets had shattered the Zorvathi navy at the Battle of Crimson Reach. Admiral Kate Holloway had lost 64 ships. The Zorvathi had lost 412. It was the most one-sided naval battle in galactic history. The humans did not celebrate. They buried their dead in space, said words over the coffins, and immediately launched their next offensive. War Master Kroll watched his empire crumble from his flagship. He had never lost a war. He had never faced an enemy who refused to stop fighting. He had assumed humans would break after the first few defeats. He had assumed they would negotiate when they saw how many of their people were dying. He was wrong. Human casualties mounted every day. Their ships were destroyed. Their soldiers were killed. Their colonies were bombarded. And still they came. More ships. More soldiers. More volunteers who left everything behind to fight. Kroll received intelligence reports that made no sense to him. Human factories were producing weapons at 300% capacity. Human scientists were working around the clock to develop new technology. Human civilians were donating blood, working extra shifts, and sending their own children to fight. The entire species had focused itself on one goal: destruction of the Zorvathi Empire. Kroll made a decision that would seal his fate. If the humans would not break through attrition, he would break them through terror. He would strike at their home. He would bomb Earth until nothing remained. He would show them what the Zorvathi did to species that resisted. He gathered his remaining forces, 300 warships, the last of the Zorvathi navy, everything he had left. The human defense fleet around Earth numbered 100 ships. Kroll smiled when he received the intelligence. 3-to-1 odds. This was a battle he could win. This was how the Zorvathi always fought. Overwhelming force. Complete destruction. He did not understand humans. The Battle of Earth began on a Tuesday morning by human calendars. Zorvathi ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They advanced toward the blue planet in perfect formation. Admiral Kate Holloway commanded the defense from her flagship, the Resilience. She had 100 ships against 300. She had defensive platforms and orbital stations, but they were designed for peacetime operations. They had been converted to military use in weeks. Her crew expected to die. They told each other goodbye. They sent final messages to their families. They made peace with whatever gods they believed in. Then they fought. Human ships did not retreat. They did not fall back to more defensible positions. They charged directly into the Zorvathi formation. They targeted the largest ships first, the carriers and battleships that formed the backbone of Kroll's fleet. The battle lasted 41 hours. Human pilots flew until their ships ran out of fuel. Then they aimed their vessels at Zorvathi carriers and accelerated to maximum speed. They died as weapons, turning their own bodies into bombs. Human gunners fired until their weapons overheated. Then they fired again, burning out systems that could not be replaced. They kept firing until their guns literally melted. Human marines boarded Zorvathi ships through breached hulls. They fought hand-to-hand through corridors and engine rooms. They died by the thousands, but they kept coming. Commander Eric Dalton commanded the defense platform Atlas 7. It was an old station, designed for mining coordination, converted to military use with bolted-on weapons and jury-rigged shields. His station was hit by Zorvathi missiles in the 19th hour of battle. The shields failed. The hull was breached. Atmosphere vented into space. Eric ordered evacuation. His crew refused. They stayed at their posts, firing weapons at enemy ships, while the station collapsed around them. In the 32nd hour, Eric was alone. His crew was dead. The station was falling apart. He had one weapons console still functioning. He recorded a final message while continuing to target enemy ships. "This is Commander Eric Dalton of Atlas 7. Station is gone. Crew is gone. I can take 3 more of them with me. Tell my wife I thought about her at the end. Tell my daughter she was the best thing I ever did. Tell everyone I did not run." He destroyed 2 Zorvathi destroyers and 1 cruiser before Atlas 7 exploded. The Zorvathi fleet was destroyed. Not one ship escaped. Kroll, the Unbroken, fled in an escape pod. He was picked up by a Zorvathi transport that had hidden in the asteroid belt. He retreated to Zorvathi space with nothing but his life and his shame. Humans had lost 73 ships, 24,000 sailors, 9 orbital platforms. The wreckage of both fleets formed a ring around Earth that would take years to clear. Velthorix watched the aftermath from a Kathrani observation vessel. He saw rescue ships searching for survivors. He saw families gathering at memorial sites. He saw the names of the dead scrolling across screens that covered entire buildings. He expected grief. He expected despair. He expected the breaking point that Kroll had tried to create. He did not see breaking. He saw rage. Human news broadcasts showed footage of the battle. They showed Eric Dalton's final message. They showed the faces of everyone who had died. Then they showed recruitment numbers. 4 million humans enlisted in the 12 hours following the battle. 8 million more in the following week. Humans who had never held weapons were lining up to be trained. Humans who had opposed the war were now volunteering. An old human male was interviewed outside a recruitment center. He was 73 years old. He had white hair and hands that shook with age. He should not have been allowed to enlist. He was in uniform. "They came to our home," he said. "They tried to kill our world. They killed my grandson. At Atlas 7. Eric Dalton was my grandson. They came to our home. Eric Dalton was my grandson. 3 power. They came to our home. They came to our world." His voice cracked, but he did not cry. "I am too old to fight on the front lines. But I can load supplies. I can work in factories. I can do something. I will not sit at home while they are still out there." Velthorix recorded this interview. He watched it many times. He had studied human history. He knew about their capacity for violence. He knew about the wars they had fought against themselves. He had believed he understood what humans were capable of. He had been wrong. Humans did not break when you killed their people. They did not surrender when you threatened their homes. They did not give up when they lost. They got angry. And angry humans were the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Velthorix sent an urgent message to the Kathrani High Council. He warned them that the war was entering a new phase. He warned them that human rage had not peaked. He warned them that whatever came next would reshape the galaxy. The High Council read his message. For the first time in 40 years, they took him seriously. They were afraid. Everyone was afraid. Everyone except the humans. The humans were not afraid. The humans were planning. Admiral Kate Holloway addressed the human fleet 3 days after the Battle of Earth. Her voice was broadcast to every ship, every station, every colony. "They came to our home. They tried to destroy everything we built. They failed. Now, we will go to their home, and we will not fail." The human fleet began assembling for the final offensive. The Zorvathi had awakened something that could not be put back to sleep. The war ended 6 months after it began. Velthorix stood aboard a Kathrani diplomatic vessel, watching the final act of a conflict that had changed the galaxy forever. He had been invited as an observer. The humans wanted witnesses. They wanted the galaxy to see what happened to species that attacked their children. The Zorvathi homeworld hung in space before them. It was a dark planet with red oceans and cities that spread across entire continents. 3,000 years of empire had built monuments and palaces and fortresses that could be seen from orbit. Human ships surrounded it. Hundreds of warships, thousands of smaller vessels. The largest fleet ever assembled by a single species. They could have destroyed the planet. They had the weapons. They had the numbers. One order from Admiral Kate Holloway, and the Zorvathi homeworld would become a dead rock floating in space. The galaxy held its breath. The order never came. Instead, human ground forces landed at the capital. They fought their way through the streets, building by building, until they reached the imperial palace. The fighting was brutal. Thousands died on both sides, but the humans did not bomb the cities. They did not destroy the infrastructure. They did not kill civilians. They came for one person. War Master Kroll the Unbroken had retreated to his throne room. He sat on a seat made from the bones of his enemies. He wore armor that had been worn by Zorvathi conquerors for 3,000 years. He held a blade that had killed 100 champions in single combat. He was waiting to die like a warrior. Human soldiers breached the doors. They poured into the throne room with weapons raised. They surrounded him. They did not fire. Admiral Kate Holloway walked through the circle of soldiers. She was smaller than Kroll by 3 feet. She weighed less than one of his arms. She had no visible weapons. She stopped in front of his throne and looked up at him. Surrender. Kroll laughed. It was a deep sound that echoed through the chamber. Kill me. It is what I would do. It is what any conqueror would do. You have earned the right. Kate studied him for a long moment. Her face showed nothing. No. Kroll's laughter stopped. No? You want to die in battle. You want to be remembered as a warrior who fell fighting. You want your name carved into Zorvathi history as a legend. She shook her head. You will live. You will watch your empire dismantled piece by piece. You will watch your military dissolved. You will watch your conquered species freed. You will watch everything you built, everything you believed in, turn to dust. She stepped closer. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that everything you were, everything you represented, was destroyed by the species you called soft. The species you dismissed. The species whose children you murdered. Her voice dropped. And when you finally die, alone and forgotten, no one will remember your name. No one will tell stories about Kroll the Unbroken. You will simply be the fool who attacked humanity and lost everything. She turned away. That is worse than death. That is what you deserve. Kroll was silent. For the first time in his life, he had no words. Human soldiers took him away in chains. The Zorvathi Empire was dissolved over the following months. Their occupied worlds were liberated. Their military was disbanded. Their warships were melted down. The metal was used to build hospitals and schools and trading posts across the galaxy. The Zorvathi people were not enslaved. They were not exterminated. They were not even punished beyond the loss of their empire. Humans sent doctors to heal wounds they had caused. They sent engineers to rebuild cities their bombs had destroyed. They sent teachers to educate children who had grown up knowing only conquest. Velthorix watched a human aid worker named Beth Sanchez on a planet called Vorath. It had been a Zorvathi military base 2 months earlier. Human bombs had destroyed most of the structures. Human soldiers had killed the garrison. Now Beth was playing with Zorvathi children in the rubble. She had taught them a human game. It involved a ball and squares painted on the ground. The children did not understand all the rules. They did not care. They were laughing. Zorvathi children, whose parents had been soldiers, whose people had murdered human children, were laughing while a human woman taught them to play. Velthorix recorded the scene. He watched it many times. This was what he could not explain to the other species. This was what made humans unique. They could hate with an intensity that burned worlds. They could love with an intensity that healed them. They chose mercy when they had earned the right to revenge. Velthorix returned to Kathrani space to complete his final report. He titled it, On the Nature of Humanity, a Warning. He submitted it to the High Council. He requested that it be distributed to every military academy, every diplomatic school, every center of learning in Kathrani space. This time, they listened. The closing section of his report became required reading throughout the galaxy. It was translated into every language. It was studied by species who had never met a human. Do not mistake human kindness for weakness. Their compassion is not submission. Their mercy is not surrender. They are the only species I have encountered that wages war, specifically to end war. They hate violence so deeply that when forced to commit it, they become the most terrifying warriors in existence. Every empire that has attacked humanity believed it was striking at a gentle civilization. Every empire believed humans would crumble under pressure. Every empire believed their kindness was a flaw to be exploited. Every empire was wrong. Humans do not want war. They want peace. They want friendship and trade and cooperation. They want to explore the stars and meet new species and share what they have learned. But they have limits. When you cross those limits, when you threaten what they love, when you harm their children, something changes. The gentle explorers become something else. The peaceful traders become warriors. The species that shared medicine becomes the species that delivers death. I watched them destroy the largest empire in the galaxy in 6 months. I watched them fight against impossible odds. I watched them die by the thousands. And keep coming. I watched them win. Then I watched them show mercy. That is the most frightening part. They could have done worse. They could have exterminated the Zorvathi. They could have burned every world, killed every soldier, erased a species from history. They had the power. They had the justification. They chose not to. They chose mercy because they are not conquerors. They do not want to rule. They do not want to dominate. They want to live in peace and help others do the same. But do not confuse that choice with inability. This is why every empire in the galaxy should pray that humanity stays peaceful. Not because humans are weak, because they are strong. Stronger than any of us. Strong enough to destroy everything and wise enough not to. Pray they stay peaceful, because if they decide the galaxy needs to burn, there is nothing any of us can do to stop them, and they will rebuild something beautiful from the ashes. Because that is what humans do. They create, they protect, they hope, and when they must, they destroy. Valthorix lived for another 300 years after the war. He spent those years studying humanity, visiting their worlds, talking to their people. He never stopped being afraid of them. He never stopped admiring them either.